This week on Quality Digest Live, we explore some productivity hacks to improve visibility into your QMS.
That's right, and plus the value of questioning consensus opinion. That and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for January 27th, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme.
Yes, it is.
You know, one of the fun things I think about January is we get everybody's technologies to watch prognostications. We recently got one actually from Shoshana Burgett of X-Rite, and her article, Manufacturing Trends to Watch in 2017, highlighted, some of the expected technologies like, custom manufacturing with 3D printing, the strengthening of onshoring, which isn't necessarily technologies, but could argue that technology plays a part in onshoring, right? So solar coatings, which I found really interesting, doing away with solar panels and actually using some sort of coating on your roofing materials in order to do the sun's business for it. All that was all actually interesting, but there's one thing that really caught my eye out of the 10 that she listed there is Amazon Go. Now, if you aren't familiar with Amazon Go, it's a blend of online, Amazon Strength, and brick and mortar. And the idea is that you walk into an Amazon Go store, simply pick what you want off the shelf, it magically detects what you have picked, and then it charges you on Amazon payments, which is kind of like PayPal, as you walk out. There's no checkout. You just walk in, pick what you want, and walk out and magically get charged. The first Amazon Go store, a grocery store actually, will officially open sometime early this year. So here's how it works. This is according to the Amazon's website. It uses computer vision, sensor fusion, multiple sensors, and deep learning, we assume about the customer. And the customer just walks, what do they call their technology? The just walk out technology is what Amazon calls it, just walk out, automatically detects when products are taken from or returned to the shelves and keeps track of them in a virtual cart. When you're done shopping, you can just leave the store. Shortly after, they will charge your Amazon account and send you a receipt. Now, what's the catch, you may ask? Well, there's no catch really, and it's not that Amazon wants to become the next Costco or Walmart, except maybe really high tech. According to Fortune magazine, and I think they probably have this right, it's all about Amazon payments, which as I said is a little bit like PayPal. According to the Fortune article, Amazon isn't so much interested in selling products in brick and mortar outlets, particularly groceries, which if you're familiar with the grocery business has ridiculously low margins. Amazon's not into that, more than likely. What they really want is all that extra traffic and data on their payment platform, Amazon Payments. Just the same, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. To me, it's just the idea of just walking and taking something off the shelf and not having to go through a checkout line is interesting. Of course, you do lose the human interaction thing, which depending what generation you're from, may be a good thing or not. But I just thought, I had never heard of Amazon Go for some reason, or maybe I heard it and didn't really know what it was. I think it's really fascinating. Technology, I don't know.
Well, they've been talking about that for a while, that something like this would be possible using all the technologies you indicated, sensors and deep learning. And there is a lot there to get to. I mean, the data part of it I think is interesting.
In terms of they want that data. They do. And plus they'll know what you're buying, which really fine tunes what they're going to push to you.
Well, sure. I mean, that's all part of the same thing, and they want their platform, of course, to be supported as well. So that's all very important. Excuse me. Okay. Well, federal funding for innovation and technological development, it's always, of interest to us here at Quality Digest. I'm sure it's interesting to you as well, especially since we're likely to see a tightening of that tax dollar spigot for such projects in 2017 and for the foreseeable future. In fact, the forthcoming funding, or the lack thereof, of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which you may have heard about, it's going to be the topic of an upcoming op-ed I'm writing right now for publication next month in Quality Digest. We've been hearing some rumblings about that, the coming budget for 2018 from the Office of Management and Budget that's incoming in this administration, looking to cut a few things, including maybe the MEP's National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and a few others. But anyway.
And minority funding for business, minority business funding.
A lot of stuff. So anyway, we're going to be looking at that. But in the meantime, comes an interesting news item from the National Institute for Standards and Technology. NIST, of course, is a non-regulatory agency housed within the Department of Commerce, and it recently announced its Small Business Research Funding Program for 2017. We linked to their article in Monday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. The first phase of the program provides individual awards of up to $100,000 intended to encourage small U.S. businesses to explore research and development opportunities that have the potential to be commercially viable. Applicants are invited to submit projects within 24 discrete technological areas, all of which fall into one of the four general groupings. The first is collaboration and partnership. The next is data and modeling. Third is precision measurement. And fourth is systems, general systems. And applications to participate in the program, they're being accepted now up until March 30th. So a few months there to get it together if you want information on that. So for more information, you can check out the story link right below the player page right down there, or you can go to the grants.gov website, and they have a lot of information about grants that are available, including this one for small business innovation. These discrete technological areas are intended to really focus the applicants on what they can do in these areas to commercially bring about things that will make money for the companies and will lead to innovation and more businesses, spur business innovation here in the U.S. I think it's really important that they do that. I'm sure a program like this will be maintained throughout the current administration, one would think and hope. But
it's hard to say.
It's hard to say.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised actually that MEP is being targeted, because you would think it's manufacturing, you would think.
Yeah.
And we don't know necessarily.
We don't know.
Kind of a rumor maybe, but.
It's very early days, of course. I mean, the director of the OMB hasn't even been
selected yet.
Well, he's been selected.
But hasn't been confirmed.
It's Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, but whether or not he gets approved by the Congress, the Senate, who knows? But I mean, we're going to keep an eye on this very topic going forward. So be sure.
Keep you in the loop.
Keep your eye on that.
All right. As Tim Lozier writes in his article, Productivity Hacking in Quality Management, when it comes to quality management, it's not just about the requirements. As companies register to ISO 9001:2015, we see an additional shift. Not only are management system requirements changing to build an improved framework for the standard, but we are also seeing an emphasis on an overall mindset that prioritizes quality. And by overall, we mean encompassing the entire organization. How can we work together as a team to promote a company-wide commitment to quality in a centralized and common way? Well, here to discuss that with us and more is Tim Lozier, Director of Product Strategy at TrackPath. Hi, Tim.
Hey guys, how are you?
Pretty good. So in your article, you say that there are conditions and barriers that prevent organizations from shifting to a full culture of quality. That, based on a survey you recently did, quality management is a priority hindered by cost and complexity. Can you give us a bit more detail about what your survey found?
Yeah, sure. So we did this survey and we asked a lot of questions, but one of the main areas that we focused on was what are the challenges that people are facing, what processes are most important to them, and what values they're going to get from them. And you're right to say that, but the thing about it is you have these barriers. There are certain things that just get in the way to getting the value you want. And one of those was cost. I mean, it was budget. It was the ability to invest that financial leap to get into what you want to do. Some of the other ones that we saw were also around, the user adoption. So user adoption was one of them. How are we going to get those users to get into it? And then one other one that was interesting was the complexity, what I'll call the complexity of implementation, which really I take to look at more how much time is this going to take me to do? So when you start thinking about the values and the challenges and how you're going to get to that value, the barriers of time, money, and adoption really become powerful obstacles to get through. And part of what we've been talking about is how to get around those barriers to get what you need.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tim, because that was going to be kind of our next question is looking at organizations looking at simple and affordable solutions that lets them, carry out those critical processes and promote visibility and tracking. But to get there, you might need to kind of hack around a little bit or work around the roadblocks in your organization. So by hack, quote unquote, do you mean short-term workarounds while you're trying to fix your system? Maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny, you think of hacking, and when you start to put that term, it has a kind of a negative connotation. You start thinking of things like WikiLeaks or Hillary Clinton's emails or things that are bad for people. And but what's interesting is in recent years, the term hack has almost had a positive note. You think of people who talk about their life hacks and things they can get around. And really, all the purpose of hacking in general is to understand the situation you're in, look at the barriers that are keeping you from getting to where you want to be, and see what kind of ways you can go around it. And so when you start looking at productivity hacking, you want to say, what's our current situation? What is the challenge I'm facing? And what's the value I want to get to? And how can I get around those barriers? Using some creative thinking, some creative methods, or thinking outside of the box. And you kind of have to get a little scrappy, but the idea is that you can go and find ways to get the value you need without having to necessarily jump through those barriers and get caught up in that. And that's really what the crux of what we're going to be talking about this Tuesday is, what are the simple, easy methods that you can kind of use and think about to kind of get yourself around some of those areas to really get to productivity.
And you mentioned earlier complexity, and in your article you make a statement, or one question that you pose in your article is, are we making this too hard? From what you've heard and experienced in the field, are people making their QMS too hard to follow or maintain? And if so, what can they do about it?
Yeah, so one of the things that we started to look at is that people are really good at defining their processes and building their requirements around a framework, whether it's ISO internally or a regulatory framework. But where things start to get a little bit muddy is when you start thinking, how do I get, what tools and what systems and what methods do I use to get from point A, the problem, to point B, the solution? And we found that a lot of people are using a lot of different methods and consuming a lot of data in between those points, whether it's email, spreadsheets, chats, talks, whatever it is. We actually pulled a study that says, humans consume about 34 gigabytes of data a day in their lives. And so the challenge becomes is that when you start building the story of quality from the point at which I detect an event to the point at which I correct an event, how many different things am I doing that aren't centralized, that are all over the place, that I'm trying to figure out? Like, how many emails do I have to go through to pick out where the crux of my issues are? And so are we making it too hard? Are we putting too much chaos into the system? And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is around the idea of centralizing, the idea of keeping it all in one place and having that traceability, have that visibility, so that way you don't have to ask, where is this all coming from? It's all coming from one place, and we can kind of hack our way around the barriers of communication to really get that full story in one place, in one conversation, and adopt a culture of enrollment towards really getting from point A to point B when it comes to quality and compliance.
Well, that's a nice setup. So you've mentioned a couple times we do have a webinar coming up next Tuesday, productivity hacking in quality management, simple ways to get more visibility and control in your processes. As you mentioned, that is next Tuesday, January 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I'm going to be there just to be the host, and Tim Lozier there is going to be the guy with all the brains telling us how to productivity hack. Tim Lozier, Director of Product Strategy at TrackPath, thanks for being with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been fun.
Okay, see you on Tuesday.
Thanks.
All right.
See you Tuesday.
All right.
And for all of you out there who want to register, there's a link in Tim's article right below the player page right down there. You also get an email on Monday in your inbox where you can register and check the one out. A lot of the people have registered for that one already.
Yep.
Should be a good group of people.
Webinar. Yep.
And make sure Tim always delivers a great webinar.
Yeah.
So check that one out. All right. Well, confession time.
Okay.
I must confess, as I want to do, that before I joined Quality Digest and learned about this incredible, fascinating industry of ours, I had very little knowledge of or appreciation for statistics, other than critical bits of knowledge, of course, such as Major League Baseball's highest single season batting average or the career leader in pitching wins.
There you go.
Stuff that you got to know. I mean, you got to know that
You just
stuff.
got to know that stuff.
I mean, of course. But exposure, however, to the writings of the very wise Donald Wheeler and the brilliant Davis Balstracci, among others, gave me some really good basic insights into the power of statistical process control, especially, as Davis likes to say, if you simply plot the dots of a process. Just plot the dots and see what's happening in real time as things are happening. And that's really important to know, I think, and keep in mind. Well, the 2016 presidential campaign and my increased reliance on Nate Silver's exceptional website, 538.com, I've mentioned it on the show. I know I've mentioned it to you, Dirk. That website helped me really make sense of and further inform my outlook for the uses of data. 538.com looks at politics and economics, social issues, sports, and a lot more, all from a purely statistical perspective. So kind of slice and dice data to reveal the truths hidden within, and I think it's really valuable to do that. Well, the core of 538.com's campaign analysis this past cycle lay within the hundreds and hundreds of state and national polls that came out kind of on a weekly basis that Silver and his team interpreted. All polls were included and weighted accordingly to present the most balanced possible picture of what was going on in the state of the campaign. Now, I emphasize all polls because Silver's models even considered such wacky polls as the UCS Dornsife LA Times Daybreak tracking poll, which consistently predicted that Donald Trump would win the election. In this,
they were obviously wrong.
I was going to say the Daybreak poll obviously was an outlier, it was a true outlier, and many of 538.com reader complained about its inclusions in Silver's overall model, which correspondingly gave Trump a much better chance of victory than practically any other poll aggregator. Imagine that.
Yeah.
You know, he included in this one poll and some others that were also outliers, and because of that, his model showed that Trump had not a great chance. His models, I think, showed Trump had like a 35% chance of winning.
Right.
Others had like as little as single digits or less,
right?
Low single digits as we went into November 8th. Well, Silver's admonition to those who doubted why he would include the Daybreak poll came down to a data analysis heresy that I hadn't previously heard of before, namely the evils of herding. I don't know if you've heard of that one. Herding.
Okay.
This is the tactic in which pollsters begin to kind of game their data, selectively pruning away outliers and generally falling into a very narrow range of expected outcomes. They do this in unison, and they do it at least, I think, semi-unconsciously, but getting rid of the outliers, those opinions that run counter to the consensus of the conventional wisdom, can severely reduce the effectiveness of your data analysis, and sometimes, as in the case of the 2016 presidential election, it can result in some really incorrect projections. Okay, all of which is a very long introduction to an article.
That was an introduction?
That was an introduction to an article. Very long introduction to an article that we ran in Tuesday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter titled Question the Consensus of Experts. And it was written, as you can see right there, by Anil Gaba, and it originally appeared on the very excellent InSeed Knowledge blog. Well, Gaba's article underlines and supports this fear that I just mentioned of herding, particularly in a business environment in which leaders have to make some forward-thinking decisions, of course, often based on backward-looking data. As the article's subhead says, just because all experts agree doesn't make them right. Herding.
Right.
It's exactly what herding is all about. In fact, this kind of herding, as we mentioned, is often a more powerful indicator that an analysis is wrong. Experts who have similar backgrounds and outlooks, when presented with the same data, will generally reach the same or very, very similar conclusions. For a leader, gauging those opinions and trying to make a decision, it might appear that expert agreement is a strong indicator that a proposed course is the right one, of course. But without outliers presenting vastly different points of view, the degree of uncertainty over a chosen action can easily be understated, and that can lead to costly mistakes. Understand what he's saying there, is that if you're just looking at what the experts say, and they're telling you a story and you're making a decision based on that, if you're not at least considering what those outliers on the margins are saying as well, you're going to have a much greater chance of being wrong, of making a wrong decision. Not to say that you've got to chuck out what the experts are saying. They have good reason for being experts, but understand what the broad range of opinion is, because it's on the margins where many times the truth can be indicated, not necessarily spoken, but at least there's indications that there's other viewpoints. That's very important to do. Now, the moral of the story is, I think, is that caution is always warranted, and that those straying from the consensus of the experts should always be considered strongly. You got to probe those contrarians for the reasons why, and you got to really do everything you can to punch holes in the arguments of those so-called experts. Now, you may still choose to go with the conventional wisdom, but at least you're going to have considered all viewpoints and move forward with a kind of a better sense of what could go wrong. I mean, this is really an example of risk-based thinking at its finest. And I want to close with an example that wasn't mentioned in the article, but came to me as I was reading this and thinking about herding. Do you ever hear of a guy by the name of George Ball?
No.
Okay. George Ball was kind of an obscure diplomat politician in the 60s. He was the Undersecretary of State for Economic and Agricultural Affairs. It looks like he was a relatively minor political figure, but he was at the edges of discussions about the escalation in Vietnam during 1965. Now, Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, Dean Rusk, many higher profile foreign policy experts were all in the tank to say, no, we've got to, as America, we've got to go forcefully into Vietnam, support the South Vietnamese government, and make our stand. We got to stand up against communism. But Ball was very much a doubter. He was very much a contrarian there. And he said, well, why? What really is at risk here? Why are we doing this? Why are we going to commit American prestige to this? Now, nobody really listened to him, to be honest. I mean, Lyndon Baines Johnson didn't listen to him. McNamara and McGeorge Bundy went out of their way to discredit him. But as history showed, Ball was right. Now, Ball was like the only one in that whole council who was saying this. And I mean, he was listened to, he was politely listened to, but nobody really took what he was saying seriously. But as it turned out, LBJ needed to say, well, what is George saying? And go to McGeorge Bundy and go to Dean Rusk and go to McNamara and say, is what he's saying, does that make sense?
Yeah, should we consider that?
Should we consider that as an outlier opinion? They didn't, but if they did, things might have gone very differently in the 1960s.
And it's funny. I mean, even now, just briefly. I mean, we talk about fake news and stuff, and sometimes we'll see something that we don't like, and we'll call it fake news before we've actually really verified that it's fake news. And very often you'll find that sometimes some of these really outrageous things that we may hear or read, when you look into them, you find, well, it's outrageous, but it isn't necessarily fake. And I think it's important sometimes to weigh all those things, which is getting harder and harder to do in some ways, because we're kind of being deluged sometimes now with messages that are unclear whether they're real or not. But you do have to kind of suss them out and go, do I need to consider this opinion?
Well, this is the indicator, and this is where it takes a lot of self-reflection as a leader who has to make a decision. You have to ask yourself, am I going into this decision with a preconceived notion? Am I trying to find data that suits what my preconceived notion is? And if you have to be honest. If you are, you've got to chuck that. You've got to do your best to chuck it. That doesn't mean that you consider more the contrarian opinion because you're trying to go the other direction too much. But you need to be aware if you have a preconceived bias on an answer going in, because if you have an answer in mind and you can cherry pick the data to support that, you're going to go wrong, almost certainly.
Okay, well, you took us into the 60s. I'm going to take us into the 60s. It is now time for the off script.
Flower power.
That's right.
Flower power, baby. Summer of love.
Vietnam. This is the off script portion of our program where Mike and I pose questions to each other that we're completely unaware of.
You're going to ask me about Woodstock.
No, I'm not going to ask you whether you went to Woodstock. And you talked about a long introduction. I've got a long introduction. Okay. So let me set this up. 1962, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States. At that time, the administration was really worried about inflation. Inflation was a problem. They were trying to deal with it. And they wanted, what they were trying to encourage companies and unions and everybody else is to keep wage increases and price increases down. Let's, you know, we don't want to jack things up and make inflation worse. And one of the things that they worked with is the administration was working with with 11 steel companies at the time. Now, it was, there were two things going on. There was the AFL-CIO was trying to work out a new contract with the steel companies. The steel companies obviously wanted to raise prices, they always do. And the administration was saying, look, AFL-CIO, settle for less than what you really want, just for now, right? Steel companies, don't raise your prices for now. Let's battle this inflation issue. AFL-CIO and the steel companies agreed. And the AFL-CIO allowed just kind of a modest increase in benefits to happen. Right after that contract, within 10 days of that contract being signed, what was his name? Roger Blau, CEO of U.S. Steel, personally went to Kennedy's office and personally told Kennedy that U.S. Steel and others were immediately raising steel prices by 3.5%. This was after kind of this agreement, right? But now the contract signed with the labor guys, basically kind of giving JFK the finger. This is what we're doing. We're raising prices. The very next day, we have Kennedy's response at a press conference. We'll watch that clip.
The simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In this serious hour in our nation's history, when we are confronted with grave crises in Berlin and Southeast Asia, when we are devoting our energies to economic recovery and stability, when we are asking reservists to leave their homes and families for months on end, and servicemen to risk their lives, and 4 were killed in the last 2 days in Vietnam, and asking union members to hold down their wage requests, at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives, whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility, can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans. A few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country, and I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
Ouch. Ouch!
Wow.
Ooh.
Bristling.
Boy, bristling, and eloquent. Unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. Utter contempt for the interests of 185 million people. I asked steel companies in the last 24 hours, and we had their answer. Here's the question I'm posing. Compare and contrast. Don't you like that? Remember that from high school? Compare and contrast President Kennedy's calling out of U.S. Steel and others to President Trump's calling out of Ford, GM, and others. Different situations, but still a calling out.
Yeah. Well, I think that what you saw there was that Kennedy was going to put himself in the place of the American people as opposed to the corporations. And I think that what Trump is doing in terms of using this idea that it really suits the American people, I don't think is exactly the same thing in terms of Ford and GM. I think that the steel industry is different than the automotive industry. I think the steel industry at that time was certainly more central to the economic welfare of the United States than the automotive industry is now. I mean, to me, And it's a whole different world, because I mean the cars that are made here are part of a humongous supply chain. I mean, the automobiles themselves may be made here, but the supplies come from all over. For instance, NAFTA, as we know, supplies a heck of a lot of parts to those cars from Mexico. Now the cars aren't maybe made in Mexico, but the parts that make those cars are made in Mexico and come over the border to make American cars. So to me, it's a different comparative. I mean, automobiles and steel, I think, are just very different industries.
So when Kennedy's saying that stepping up for the American people, say, look, this is good. What you're doing is bad for America. Isn't Trump doing the same thing by saying, look, what you're doing is bad for America?
I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say that that's how he's at least couching it. I don't know. I mean, we have 6 days or 7 days of knowledge here about what this really means. I think that he's really trying to bring jobs back and keep jobs here as much as he can. And to him, the metric's always going to be, can we add or keep jobs here, regardless of really what kind of jobs those are. I mean, Kennedy was really more concerned about, I think, keeping the cap on inflation, as he mentioned there. And he saw this as the tentacles of the steel industry penetrating all these different other industries, and that cost would escalate accordingly. The automotive industry, I think, is much more siloed in terms of the effect on the U.S. economy than the steel industry was in 1962. So I think Kennedy's umbrage there was much more justified than Trump's umbrage will be if you see Ford and GM and all these other nameplates moving away and taking jobs with them.
Okay, and real quick, one thing that was edited out of that clip, but is in the original transcript, which I have here, and I want to read this because I think this is interesting, and just get your comment on it. In short, at a time when they could be exploring how more efficiency and better prices could be obtained, reducing prices in this industry in recognition of lower costs, their unusually good labor contract, their foreign competition, and their increase in production and profits, which are coming this year, a few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices and ruthless disregard to public responsibilities. So the initial part of that is they should be exploring more efficiency and how better prices could be obtained and so forth.
Well, yeah, and I mean it's analogous to the automation that we've seen in the automotive industry. Where they're saving money. I mean, they are saving money through not having as many people turning screws on the assembly line. And, it's similar in that way, in that those savings should escalate down to the American consumer.
Should be passed along, right?
I don't know if they will or not. I mean, who knows? I mean, if you're a shareholder of Ford or GM, it will be. You'll get the benefit of that. But will prices come down for cars on sale in the U.S. market? Doubtful. I mean, if prices go down by 5%, I don't think you'll see a cut in prices. I think you'll see profits increasing for the
the margins go up,
and you'll see taxes going down too. I mean, he wasn't talking about tax breaks to those companies. Kennedy wasn't. Trump is, and Trump is talking about making sure that these corporations do as well as they possibly can. I mean, the theory is the old trickle-down theory that as those corporations do better and as the wealthy do better, that money will trickle down through the economy. It's an open question as to whether or not that actually happens.
By the way, in case anybody was wondering, 3 days later, U.S. Steel and the other companies said, "Okay, we're not going to raise our prices." Okay.
That's known as
a year later, though they did.
They did. Well, that's known as the bully pulpit right there. I mean, but yeah, what you saw in that clip was Kennedy was mad.
Oh yeah, he was
bristling mad.
Yeah, and that was a very there's ways to dress down people eloquently, and there's ways to dress them down ineloquent.
Yeah.
That was a very eloquent dressing down.
Well, and that's Trump doesn't dress down people the same way, but it does dress people down. No doubt about it. All right, thanks, Derek. Well, next week's my chance. I'll get something on you, and we'll do off script next week for me and you. Okay. Well, that's our show for this week. But before we go, we want to thank our sponsor. Mitutoyo Corporation is the world's largest provider of measurement and inspection solutions, offering the most complete selection of machines, sensors, systems, and services, with a line encompassing CMMs, vision, form, and finish measuring machines, as well as precision tools and instruments, and metrology data management software. Mitutoyo's nationwide network of metrology centers and support operations provides application, calibration, service repair, and educational programs to ensure that their more than 6,000 metrology products will deliver measurement solutions for their customers. For more information, visit mitutoyo.com or click on the banner area just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
That's right, and that is the end of today's show. Thank you for joining us. Remember the TrackPath webinar, Productivity Hacking in Quality Management, Simple Ways to Get More Visibility and Control in Your Processes. That's next Tuesday, January 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. The webinar will be presented by Tim Lozier, who we spoke to just earlier in the show, so keep your eye on your email inbox for details about how you can register. Thanks to Tim Lozier for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.
Have a great weekend. See ya. Bye.